Welcome to Careers Unwrapped, where we delve into real-life career stories from successful people who've been through it all, the ups and the downs. We'll get their raw, honest, actionable advice and be the careers talk they wish they'd had when they started out. As someone who has had a varied career, from soldier to salesman, expedition leader to entrepreneur, he knows firsthand that your career doesn't always lead you where you expect it to. Here's your host, Mark Fawcett.
Hello and welcome to Careers Unwrapped. I'm your host, Mark Fawcett, and with me today is Alexis Maule. Alexis is a true globe-traveling leader with 15 years experience across industries such as fashion, e-commerce, technology and banking. And we're going to be talking about how she's developed her career to reach her potential and also the lessons she's learned along the way. So Alexis, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and thank you for such a kind introduction.
So one of your last roles was Reformation, who say that being naked is the number one most sustainable fashion option and Reformation is number two. How overall is the challenge of sustainability in an era of fast fashion being tackled by the finance industry?
Yeah, it's a very big challenge. I think one of the reasons that I loved working at Reformation and something about the brand is that they really have designed the brand with sustainability at the core. So Reformation was founded as a vintage brand. They have built sustainability into their full supply chain, and they really believe in end-to-end sustainability in almost everything that they do. And it's one of their core values and a core part of their product offer. And I think it's wonderful that the brand can speak authentically about that, and especially in Europe, really connect with consumers who are conscious about where they're making purchases from and really do care about the environment. I do think that's starting to change globally. It's happening slowly, but it's important. It's very challenging, I think, for fashion brands to be fully sustainable and because of the cost, but it's important given how much waste is made from fashion brands. And I think there's more and more brands that are being committed and companies that are being committed to this. And we're seeing things like putting taxes on fast fashion and really starting to address the financial piece to not make it so easy to just produce in an unsustainable and wasteful manner. And I'm glad to see that happening.
But how both manufacturers and brands going to change consumer behavior when it's so easy to order 3 items, have them delivered the next day, send 2 back because you only want to choose 1, and also expect to be paying pretty low prices, euros, dollars, pounds for that. So how do you break that cycle?
Yeah, I think it's less about breaking the cycle and more about education, more about resonating with values. It's more about meeting the consumer where they are. So, yeah, you're assuming maybe that people are ordering online and doing that. I think one of the great things about Reformation and working with a brand like that is it's omni-channel. And so there are physical stores where you can go directly try things on, as well as e-commerce, which is a big part of the business model. And there's wholesale. So there are different ways to shop. And I think we've seen more recently that there is not one model that in fact, the combination of e-commerce with physical retail is a way that many people like to consume. And I do believe that is one of the winning models to have the physical touch points. And I think that can not just alleviate some of that behavior, but also allow customers to view product in person and really understand the size and fit. So I don't think a full brick and mortar offer is the way to go, but there's this new blend that I think sits nicely in between.
And if we were speaking to somebody who's just getting going with their own fashion brand, somebody young starting out in this area, what do you think are the big opportunities and challenges ahead for the wider fashion sector?
Yeah, I do think cost and sustainability in the manufacturing is definitely a challenge, but I don't think it's an insurmountable challenge. I think it's quite difficult when you have a company already that's been operating for many years and then you have to recreate processes. But if actually you think about that from the beginning and work with partners and build the model to be more sustainable from the beginning, it's much easier. So it's having that top of mind, having that as a value. And actually, I think it can also be done through partnerships. You can do partnerships with the likes of Vestiaire, where they can post, you can sell your used items, get credit to buy new items. There's rental, there's repair. The ecosystem is so vast now. There's recycling. I think there are many ways to engage in the circularity for brands that are easier to implement. You don't have to build it all into your own model. You can do a partnership and do it that way.
Now, I know one of the areas that you've become involved in is the wider sort of area of diversity and representation in the fashion industry overall. What have you been championing to try and make change in that area? And what do you think the wider industry needs to perhaps do a bit better?
I am a diverse person in many ways, and I think it's really important for me to champion giving underrepresented groups and people who don't have opportunities that others have a chance in really helping from a skill set point of view, but putting the industry on people's radar so it doesn't seem like an unattainable goal. Sometimes it's just a lack of awareness or people feeling that it's not something that they can break into. So there's a big education piece for me, but there's also, I think, a level of investment in talent development and training, which goes across the employee board, not just for specific groups. And then I actually really do believe that diversity means many different things. There's diversity of ethnicity, of gender, of I feel as an American, there's international diversity. So getting people together. So I really take all of that into consideration and try and champion recruiting from a wide range of sources and really getting a diverse pipeline. I do think teams with people who are best in their industries but come from different walks of life can be very effective.
And you said you're American educated, you're now living and working from the UK. What have you seen about some of the key cultural differences between working in those two nations? And what are they doing differently when it comes to diversity?
Culturally, I find UK and Europe to be a bit more balanced than the US. The US is pretty hardcore, but I've mostly worked in New York and California and kind of some high action cities. Not all of the US is like that, but I think diversity is very, very different between the US and between looking at what diversity means here in UK and Europe even. The groups can be different. I find in Europe, there's a lot of people coming from countries where in the US, a lot of diversity means sort of African American or Hispanic American, but those groups aren't very prominent in Europe. It's totally different people coming from South America, from Asia, from Africa directly, and kind of the melting pot that's created. So it's hard to compare apples to apples, but I think the undercurrent is people who have come from underprivileged backgrounds, irregardless of ethnicity. But I think in the UK, they ask questions I've seen on job applications about if you were on meal programs or if your parents went to private or public school, and questions to sort of get after sort of what background you come from. And then there's neurodiversity. It's a vast topic, but I think it's important to be inclusive.
I think that you're right in that in the UK especially, there's so much focus on social mobility and the elements of diversity or a lack of diversity or opportunity created through a lack of social mobility. So your family's wealth or your family's education, the higher education of your parents and those sort of areas. And a lot is being done in different sectors and different businesses to try and make everything just fairer, basically, just a much fairer and level playground. And I think one thing that's interesting, I'm just going to take you right back earlier in your career. I believe that one of the first roles you did after college was you worked for a while at the White House, quite closely to Michelle Obama's office. And so what was that experience like? What did you do there?
Well, just taking a step back, I am from Chicago, which is where the Obamas are from. And I went to a high school where a lot of people in an area where a lot of people were really excited about the campaign. One of my first jobs in high school, or actually my last job in high school, was working for Barack Obama's campaign for US Senate. So that was incredibly exciting. I loved the campaign. I loved how entrepreneurial it was. I loved sort of seeing people working together towards one cause. And that was my first foray into politics. I do come from a family that in the past has been very involved in politics, as my
Right.
great grandfather was one of the first African American state senators in Illinois. So it was nice to be able to participate in that. And then when I graduated from university at Harvard, the market crashed and I was very focused on finance, but there was a financial crises. And so I thought, okay, I wanted to give politics a try again and was lucky enough to be selected as a White House intern. And I think it's a wonderful program, again, to give people from all different backgrounds experience and exposure to government and to really see the inner workings. And so for me, it was an amazing learning. And at the time, I was still trying to figure out where I would end up from a career perspective and was quite green in that respect. So I really took the experience on board and was very lucky to be able to participate and to see that. I did go back to New York after that. The market was better and I went back into investment banking. But I think that experience, and it's important for others to have, whether it's internships or here they call them something else, fellowships, but at least these experiences where you can get a taste of something because as you're seeing in the US, I think it's important to cultivate leadership from younger demographics. So we have a pipeline of leaders for the future, which I think is a topic that resonates both in the US and the UK in terms of not getting stuck with quite limited options.
And you said that your eyes were opened by seeing the inner workings of the political process there. What did you take away from that that you've actually then been able to use in more commercial and business environments?
Definitely themes across diplomacy, ways of working, sort of building rapport and coalition across offices, the importance actually of inclusivity. So, not just putting together, when you think about some of the key sort of events that come in, I was in the social secretary's office, but they're tasked with essentially putting together a lot of programming for the White House, for the broader public. So you have to be inclusive of different cultures. You have to take into consideration different holidays, and you have to think about sort of what kind of programming and artists. It's not just sort of from a singular perspective of do the people you're representing like, but really what is representative of the greater community. So I think that was very important and thinking about that and sort of looking at how to best be inclusive during that process.
Now, a lot of career starters anxious sometimes about making the right decision. What sector should I go for? What job should I go for? How would I apply for that job? And you're somebody who, as I said in the introduction, has worked across several different roles and sectors so far. How have you planned your career moves or your career decisions and changes? What's been your approach to developing your own career?
So early on in my career, like high school, university, I think they call it A levels and university. I really loved internships and work study because I truly believe in trying before you buy. And the more you try, the easier it is to figure out what you want to do. So I remember when I graduated from university, I was open to doing almost anything. I mean, I really thought the sky was the limit, and I really didn't know what these areas were, but they all sounded kind of good and like something I could do. So I think it's been trying different sectors, trying different industries that helped me sort of fall into what I'm doing now, which is actually the union of two areas that I really fell in love with, which are consumer and technology. So going to Stanford Business, I had the exposure to technology in Silicon Valley, which I didn't have before. And then I had always had this passion for consumer goods. And that's when I fell into e-commerce and sort of fashion. Fashion has been, I would say, a lucky aspect of my role in luxury, but really my focus, I started at Amazon, so sort of pure e-commerce. And I finally found a mix of blending business and commercial, but not so much as I had in investment banking, which I knew I could not be, or I did not want to be an investment banker for the rest of my life and be stuck under an Excel spreadsheet, with something more exciting and creative and artistic. And so for me, my path has been a lot of trial and error, but finally blending things and also coming from the business side, right? Because I'm not a designer, I'm not an artist or anything like that. So I'm coming as the business person. And so, yeah, it took a lot of trial. But I was at Yoots Net-a-Porter. That was my first job after business school. And I was there. I was just supposed to be there for the summer and I left after 7 years. So it was the internship that never ended and that turned into one of the best career experiences of my entire life. So I do think when you try, when you work really hard, and that's another thing that's important. I do believe in very hard work. I do believe on a fundamental level in really creating high performance environments and making sure that there's meritocracy, even with incorporating different viewpoints. But if you work hard and you really give it your all, the things will fall into place. It doesn't happen overnight, but it will come together and the dots will start to sort of make a trend.
What you said there about trial and error, I think is really important. And often when people are starting their career, they look at people 20 years ahead of them full of success, it seems. They think that's just a successful person. That's just how it goes. But I think most of us realize that there's quite a lot of fails and mistakes and highs and lows along the way. And I'd be interested to know from yourself, Alexis, perhaps in the early stage of your career, what do you look back and think that was a great success? But also importantly, what do you look back and say, I got that wrong? That was a fail.
I want to say it's less about I got that wrong, but it's really to tell people to listen and pay attention to the red flags and to the things that pinch you or things that you end up gravitating away towards. So, one, environment is very important. I could be doing the same job in two different environments and excel in one and completely fail in another. I've learned that. I've learned that if you start something, internships is good because it's a shorter period, but if you go into a place and you're not excited about it, you have a lot of stress, you don't like who you're working, all these things start to just develop organically. You don't fit in. Those are signs that are really important to listen to. And it probably means it's not the right place for you. And that's okay. Like, not every job and every workplace is a fit. It's just not. So you have to be willing to try on a few pairs of shoes and try and pick for your own well-being, for your own development, what works best for you and where you think you will thrive and develop. And that will not be every job. And you will go someplace and start all the little things that you said, oh no, this is not a big deal, or oh, it will get better, or a lot of things can be swept under the rug over Zoom. You start meeting people in person. Pay attention to that and really, and this is what I love about Europe, is having this probation period. It's okay to say, listen, thank you so much. I've learned so much, but I don't think this is the right fit for me, and work out a way to get yourself in a place that is. And so I definitely have had those types of experiences. A lot of them have similar characteristics in that I knew very quickly, like not a year in, but several weeks, several months, very quickly into the role that there were going to be some significant challenges. And in some cases, I was able to put my head down and kind of sweep them under the rug. But most of those things did not, I took on board. And then there's other instances, like I told you, Ukes Net-a-Porter, where I joined Ukes. I was supposed to be there for the summer. Ukes bought Net-a-Porter, and I left 7 years later. So it can happen both ways. You always hope for the YNAB example where a summer turns into 7 years and everything falls into place, but it's not something that happens every time. Trust me about that.
I think what you say about red flags is so important, and it resonates a lot with my own experiences. And even from my first job after university was in the army. And I spent some time out in the deserts in the Middle East. And so you could get alert to what might be going on around you. And red flags then was something you definitely paid attention to, because trouble could come around the corner pretty quickly. But the same approach then moving into a business environment. I remember particularly the first time I raised any substantial sums of money from external investors. And I went after the money far more than I went after the people. And I raised the money very easily, but I brought with it the wrong people, not bad people, just the wrong people for me. And I sort of knew it at the time, but I was so keen to get the money raised that I just went through with it. And then I had to deal with some fallout after a while and eventually bought those shareholders out. So it was there, the red flag, and I didn't pay enough attention to it. And I think it's taken me years and years now to, when the red flags pop up, it could be anything. It could be a person, it could be a client, it could be a financial decision. Go, hang on, I've seen these red flags before and they often don't end well. So why don't we take some action right now?
Or just knowing these are environments. So for instance, for me, I love collaborative environments. I'm a team person. I like working in a place that's international, especially now that I've worked in different places. I love companies that outside of just their region. That's actually become a very critical aspect for me. I love meritocracy because I'm someone who works very hard. And in addition to softer skills, I really like to be in a place where it's meritocratic and sort of your performance is evaluated. And there's always going to be relationships in this and that, but you can walk into a place where you know no one. And I actually did that at Ukes Net-a-Porter. I literally went there and knew not one sole person, and can be completely evaluated based off of your performance and not need to know someone or have a connection. So those are the things that are important for me. And I've also learned there are environments and types of businesses that are more challenging. I don't think I would like to go back into an area that's very competitive or where you're competing with your colleagues. I like competition as a team and hitting goals and benchmarks, but I don't like to be competing with the people that I'm working with and supposed to be relying on. I'm very transparent and direct, and I like environments. So, I mean, everyone's different. Everyone's going to have their own flavor, and what works for me might not work for you, and vice versa. But it's important to identify it, write it down, and be mindful of looking for these things as you're interviewing and figuring out your next steps.
Yeah, and the environment is not determined by the sector. And I think too often some of the younger career starters we speak to are thinking, I don't want to work in finance. I do want to work in tech. I don't want to work in this. Go, well, actually, there are great roles and great environments in finance, and there are bad ones. And there are great and bad ones in entertainment, in fashion. So it's less about the sector. It's more about the purpose and vision of the organization, what your role will be, and the environment that you will fit into. And you've now obviously risen into positions of leadership in roles that you do now. How might others describe you as a leader?
Yeah, so I really believe in one, positive work environment and fostering a positive work environment. Two, I believe in collaboration, and I usually hire specialists and kind of bring people together with different viewpoints, and we sort of function as a team. I don't micromanage people. I really like working with people who are really driven and where I can sort of provide guidance and feedback, but I'm not hand holding individuals along the way, but providing sort of feedback and coaching and direction in that sort of way. And I really believe that in investing in my team and understanding what people's learning goals are and really setting them up for success in an organization. That's really important to me. And I've appreciated when bosses have done that for me as well.
It's clear from what you say how much you thrive on working with driven, energetic, enthusiastic people. And almost in our brief conversation, you seem to light up most, and it's talking about the environment and the people you were with inside that environment. So when you're recruiting, and obviously there's an interview process and you're trying to find the right person, they're trying to find the right job. How do you go about getting under the skin of whether the personality is going to fit with you and your organization? How do you get beyond the experience on the CV to the actual person?
Yeah, I mean, aside from meeting with me and HR, usually people always do a case and that kind of weeds out or that helps you determine sort of people's ability to do the work in a self-led way and to be able just to produce sort of materials that can be a big part of some of the work. But then it's getting them to meet people they would be working with on the team and having them evaluate the person based off of culture and somebody else in the organization also for culture. So I think having those perspectives in the interview process is important. I also think it's about finding qualified candidates, but making sure you get the brief and the opening out enough so that those qualified candidates have the opportunity to apply. So I actually I make sure that things are posted. I do post on a lot of school job boards, it's like the MBA programs in Europe, LBS, NCOD in the US, in across my own WhatsApp groups and networks that I'm a part of. And so, yeah, and it could also be looking at the group dynamic, like, hey, I work in fashion, our team is mostly women, actually would be very beneficial to make sure that we have men in the recruiting process because that's diversity in that case, actually. And that could be an example for some industries when it's very skewed. So it's really looking at diversity from very different ways. Being internationals, I think when I was in Italy and then working in London with Net-a-Porter, sometimes that means, hey, let's make sure that we have one other person or a person from the team that we're trying to get maybe from the US or somewhere that provides a different view than just UK and Italy, or if it's certain way, just making sure that we always had a blend, even from APAC or different places that we were looking outside of our own sort of majority and making sure that we had this pipeline. I think that's important.
Yeah. Now, one of the decisions you made in your career was to do an MBA. And that's something which may cross a lot of people's mind. What am I going to get out of it? What's the effort and cost that's going to go? I'm going to have to invest to achieve in that. What do you think that learning and that approach gave you? What were the greater benefits to you?
So getting an MBA and going to Stanford, those were probably the two best years of my entire life. I had to invest to do it. So I just paid off my student loans and it'll be my 10-year reunion next year. And I would do it again. Honestly, it changed my life. It sort of propelled my career in a very different way. I think before then, as I said, most of my exposure was consulting banking. I really didn't know how to do much of anything else. And then this technology thing in Silicon Valley just gripped my attention and here I am. So I really encourage MBAs, people to consider MBAs. I encourage them to work first and then go. And I think most MBAs encourage that as well. And I would encourage people to make the most of the 2 years. And I really made the most of it through classmates, through travel, through doing. And I think one of the reasons I'm here in the UK is because Stanford really pushed on international experience and kept saying the impact that actually you can make outside of the US is so much greater. And to think about being one person in a smaller pond versus 100 people with my resume in San Francisco. And I'm very grateful for that advice.
With all the experience you've gained on the way, if you can imagine going back to Chicago and meeting through the magic of time travel with younger Alexis finishing school, starting college, what do you think are the key lessons you would pass on to your younger self from the career learnings you've had so far?
I would say that regardless of what happens, the sun will always come up tomorrow. There is nothing more important than well being, health, family, and your community. And it's important to have perspective. So don't get too caught up. It's not the end of the world, and really make sure to prioritize. I love that example of in an airplane, before you help somebody else, make sure that you have your own oxygen mask. So, all the basics, eating, sleeping, looking after yourself, well being, that matters more than any diploma, than any achievement, than staying up all night for an exam, than any bonus or job offer, and to always prioritize that and try and create a balance.
And do you think there are points in the development of your career where you haven't got that balance right? You emphasize the need for hard work, which I completely agree with. But have there been at points where you have pushed the hard work to such an extent that the well-being and the health has started to suffer a bit?
Well, I mean, I did 2 years as an investment banking analyst in New York, and I worked almost every day, 7 days a week. We got to pick one Saturday or one Sunday off a month, each of us, not both, so not the full weekend. And I would go home at about 2 or 3 in the morning when I would wake up and have to be back there the next day. So, yeah, I think there are industries and roles that can be incredibly grueling. That being said, it was one of the best prep programs for my later career and skill set builders. And I'm grateful that I did it, but I knew that it had a time, I had a shelf life and a time limit. And I actually loved my team. I loved the people I worked with. I was the only woman on the team as well. And it was really tough. And I told them very directly in my third year, it's one of the reasons I applied to business school, was that for my own health, stay here every day until 2 or 3 in the morning and come back here at 9 o'clock in the morning. It's just not the way I want to live my life. And so, yeah, I made that decision and found a different way. So I knew it was not sustainable, but it served a purpose, and I'm glad I did it. So that's an extreme example, but there are things that you can do for a limited amount of time. But I think it's sometimes, you just have to be mindful.
Yeah, I have been through the process of startup businesses, running businesses, and sometimes you think that it's the absolute center of your whole life. And when you make mistakes, everything's going to come crashing down. But as you said, the sun will come up the next morning. And I think it's one of the small advantages of having worked for a number of years now, is that being through recessions, being through political changes, being through COVID more recently, you can handle this and the sun will come up again and you'll be able to move forward. And Alex, I think some of the lessons that you've brought out from here about once you're getting going on your career, about trying before you buy, about being open to everything, about not being overly fixated on certain sectors and looking for the environment and the people that really suit you, I think are really useful insights or reminders for people starting or developing their career to take away from here. And I also note what you said about your approach to leadership personally, about creating an environment where people can thrive, about collaboration, about working with driven or energetic people. And others could also think for themselves, well, if I'm going to lead, what do I want my environment to be like? 'Cause it may not be the same as yours, but you need to think about it because it's the environment and the people that need to fit together.
Yeah, you have to model that. And I mean, don't get me wrong. And I say this to teams and people, and I've had to work for a lot of CEOs. So when there's deadlines and things are due, all hands on deck, but manage your work, manage your time. And I don't expect anyone to sit in their chair every day till 12, to do FaceTime. And I think that's silly. So I think it's just being realistic and reasonable. And because people, they'll burn out or they'll leave if they don't have a bit of flexibility. I mean, their parents, they have young children, all types of stuff, caregivers, it doesn't make sense. But for the deadlines and things that are important, yes. And then I think that's also on the person to manage in advance as well.
Yeah. I think that it's clear your career from college to White House to investment banking to MBA to e-commerce and tech, consumer fashion, it both appears on the outside very varied and bouncing around, but actually when you understand it more, it's building up of a set of experiences and a greater understanding of what drives and entertains you, and also then how you build that together to just sharpen the spear of your own career. So I found that really interesting, Alexis. Thank you so much for joining us on Careers Unwrapped. It's been really nice to speak to you and really interesting to hear your thoughts on your own career. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the last thing I would say is post internships, there are things called interim roles and advisory and consulting, all of which I'm doing now, which I feel that they're adult internships, which make me very happy. So there's always a chance to try something new and get different experience. And it's a long life. So make the most of it.
Brilliant. Alexis, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
This podcast is sponsored by We Are Futures. To find out more about We Are Futures and how we can introduce your brand, business, or organization to the mass markets of tomorrow, visit www.wearefutures.com. Make sure to search for Careers Unwrapped in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at We Are Futures, thanks for listening.